So what will the service mean for those people who lead us on similar urban journeys with the power of words alone? The streets of modern Britain have been mapped by crime writers in recent years. Readers of Ian Rankin's Rebus novels will have a treat of
it's really what this is. I'll hear all about it. Yeah.
Who will be the official Welsh artist at the 53rd Venice Biennale as a spice of your own life, your house. Your 42,000 miles of British roads captured by Google's new Street View service. You may have already looked up a frozen slice of your own life, your house, your school, the place where you were born. Thanks to Google, we can now take virtual walks through 25 British cities. So what will the service mean for those people who lead us on similar urban journeys with the power of words alone? The streets of modern Britain have been increasingly mapped by crime writers in recent years. Readers of Ian Rankin's Rebus novels will have a pretty good idea of the geographical layout of Edinburgh. Fans of Graham Hurley's novels will be able to find their way around Portsmouth, even if they've never been there before. Both authors join me on the line now. Ian Rankin in Edinburgh. Crime fiction relies on the accumulation of evidence, doesn't it? The readers are following a trail with his help to lay that trail.
Well, you've got to remember that we are writers of fiction, and there has to be a little bit of leeway. If there's a bit of Edinburgh that isn't quite where I want it to be, I need the freedom to move it somewhere else. That means it's going to work for the story that I want to tell. I mean, these aren't, these aren't biographies or historical books. They're novels. I remember a friend of mine being she couldn't read another Frederick Forsyth novel after she read one, and he had a phone box outside a supermarket in the town where she lived, and she said, there is no phone box outside that supermarket. So you can take things too far, John.
Graham Hurley, Portsmouth isn't covered by this Google mapping service yet, but that, I presume, is a relief for you.
An enormous relief, yeah. I think it's part of the sort of fortress Pompey trope, you know. This is a city that's seen off the French and the Dutch and the Germans, and I think it's also seen off Google, because word on the street is that they did make an appearance last August, but they looked far too much like the TV detector vans, and so they were chased north back onto the mainland.
But
this is where they belong, really.
But do you find yourself walking the streets with manuscript in hand, checking whether that right turn that you say a detective turns into actually exists, whether it's not a one-way street, that sort of thing?
Well, I'm a slight anorak with this, because I do my first draft, and I've lived in Pompey for 30 years. I think I've got it right. But when I invent a real house, I tend to, if for instance a street has 75 addresses in it, I tend to go for 76 or 77 to avoid the courts. And so my wife and I have a sort of away day once the first draft is done, and we literally, and it sounds pathetic, but we literally journey from street to street to street to make sure that call box or that pillar box is where I say it was.
And Ian Rankin, would you expect readers to check out the scene of the crime now after reading about it in one of your books, or one hand with book in one hand, computer mouse in the other, that sort of thing?
Well, I mean, readers sometimes say to me, I could do with a map at the back of your books, and I think, well, you could just buy an A to Z. A lot of them do come to Edinburgh, and they try and do a Rebus trail. Either one, there is one that exists, and a guide will take them round, or they just do it for themselves. I remember, the great case of this, I guess, is James Joyce writing Ulysses while living in mainland Europe, and writing to friends back in Dublin saying, can you just check how many paces you would take before you turned the corner into that street there, because he wanted this precise, almost Google-style map of Dublin to be there on the page. But you said it yourself at the top of the show, it's a frozen view, it's a moment in time. I mean, the vans weren't photographed in Edinburgh when the roads were being dug up for the trams. If you come to Edinburgh now and try and walk down Princess Street, it ain't like Google shows it.
And Graham, this service makes a detective of all of us in a way, doesn't it? Because we've all been trying to work out when the photo of our house was taken, why the car is not there on a particular day, that sort of thing.
That's right. I think it's fascinating. I mean, Pompey isn't on the map, as you say, but I can imagine a situation where if one day it is, and I Google my own house, I'm looking at it, I'm seeing my best friend's car outside, I'm looking at the upstairs bedroom window, the curtains are closed, and I'm thinking, now when did that happen, and why did he never mention that? Oh. Should I have a sort of session with the wife? And there's another thing, I thought about this all afternoon, and then I thought, a much spookier story. So again, you Google, and it's your street, and it's your address, and you find a sailor greed board outside, and then you look in the front garden, you can make out everything. So you can make out the soggy double mattress abandoned in the front garden, the rusting rowing machine, the scatter of old manuscripts, the Madder Jaffrey cookbook that you never quite got the hang of. So that's your whole life on show, and it's some weird sort of time shift. A snapshot of a life that's yet to happen. And, you know, this is sort of high-concept Hollywood.
There's a weird sort of climate shift going on as well, because I've noticed that it always seems to be sunny in Britain. It's not a very noirish view.
No, because these vans tend not to go out when it's snowy or when it's rainy. The cameras can't work properly in those conditions, so it's a weirdly skewed snapshot of Britain. I think the race is on now. Graham's just flagged it up. The race is on now to see which crime writer in Britain actually uses this Google facility as a clue, as a way of solving a crime in one of their books. So I'm halfway through a book just now. I'll see if I can squeeze it in somewhere.
And everybody, of course, is now on the lookout for bad behaviour. That, you know, people have picked up on the papers today, that guy being sick outside a pub and somebody else being arrested, that sort of thing. It's almost like a Where's Wally of the internet, isn't it?
Yeah, yes, Graham. Look, there has to be some sort of way of stitching all these images together, which I guess is what Ian and I do. You know, you're looking for narrative in this essentially, I guess, two-dimensional addition to our knowledge, and it's that third dimension, or even fourth, that would be really, really interesting.
Thanks very much to Graham Hurley and to Ian Rankin in Edinburgh. Ian and Graham on the mean streets of Google. Now, with the success of Duffy at the Brit Awards and Adele at the American Grammys, pop critics have agreed that it's a vintage year for British female artists. And now, joining the likes of Florence and the Machine and Lady Gaga in the most likely to succeed camp is Vivi Brown.
Quite overly interested